Good morning. It is Tuesday, February the 1st, and this is The Drill. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Daily Declaration for Spiritual Warfare and the Star-Spangled Banner and the Pledge of Allegiance, then we will have no free lunch, the Golden Age of Cranks, Mark Kaye, John and Ken, Sean Hannity, and Feel Safe. All that and more when I come back. Thank you. Ineffable Creator, who out of the treasures of thy wisdom has appointed 3 hierarchies of angels and set them in admirable order high above the heavens, and has disposed the divers portion of the universe in such marvelous array. Thou who art called the true source of light and supereminent principle of wisdom, be pleased to cast a beam of thy radiance upon the darkness of my mind and dispel me from the double darkness of sin and ignorance in which I have been born. Thou who makest eloquent the tongues of little children, fashion my words and pour upon my lips the grace of thy benediction. Grant me penetration to understand, capacity to retain, method and facility in study, subtlety in interpretation, and abundant grace of expression. Order the beginning, direct the progress, and perfect the achievement of my work. Thou who art true God and man, and livest and reignest forever and ever. Amen. Thank you. And now the Daily Declaration for Spiritual Warfare for February the 1st. I am the God who answers by fire. When my servant Elijah stood before the 400 false prophets of the enemy and called upon my name, I answered his prayer with my all-consuming fire. When the people saw my fire, they fell to the ground and worshipped me. In my power and strength, Elijah destroyed the enemy's false prophets. Remember this and call upon my name when you are overpowered by the enemy. I will come down with my righteous fire and destroy all your enemies. I am the Lord who reigns over all the earth. My holy fire goes before me and consumes all your foes on every side. The lightning of my power lights up the world, and the earth sees and trembles, and the mountains melt like wax before me. 1 Kings chapter 18, Psalm 97, verses 1 through 5. Prayer declaration. Father, you are the God who answers by fire. Release your fire and burn up the works of darkness. Let your fire burn in my eyes, my heart, my belly, my mouth, and my feet. Let your fire be in my tongue to preach and prophecy. Make me a minister of your fire. And that is the Daily Declaration for Spiritual Warfare for February the 1st.
All the
Thank you, thank you. Who is the true conservative? He is the person that understands that conservatism is not just about politics, but culture as well. He acts like an adult. He is patriotic and uses common sense. He makes judgments, refuses to speculate, speaks clearly and definitively, and is not afraid to say no. He is open-minded, asking why rather than why not. He is consistent, credible, and influential, not ashamed of his existence, unafraid to learn or correct his mistakes. He is a normal American, and he is better than the socialist. He is a better friend, father, brother, family member, and a better person, period. Thank you, thank you. And now there's no free lunch. The process of discovery begins when we observe, often vaguely, a gap between what is and what could be. Our intuition tells us something better is just beyond the range of our mind's eye. To build a culture of discovery, we must encourage, not discourage, the passionate pursuit of hunches, no matter their origin. Charles G. Koch. This inquisitive component of human nature is God created, and out of this process comes miraculous things. Human observation transcends that of animals, who may very well observe basic empirical realities but lack the soulful capacity for bridging the gap between what is and what could be. Humans were given not just this ability, but this burden, this opportunity, this cultural mandate. And that was, there's no free lunch. Thank you, thank you. And now, the golden age of cranks. In 5 years, from 1971 to 1975, I directly experienced EST, Gestalt therapy, bioenergetics, rolfing, massage, jogging, health foods, Tai Chi, Esalen, hypnotism, modern dance, meditation, Sylvia mind control, Erica, acupuncture, sex therapy, Reichian therapy, and Morehouse. So wrote Jerry Rubin in 1976 in as perfect an evocation of the spirit of the time as anybody has put to paper. America has always been the promised land of confidence men and hucksters, the happy hunting ground of P.T. Barnum and Charles Ponzi. But seldom did hucksters hunt with greater success than in the 1970s. In 1972, a 24-year-old Israeli named Uri Geller appeared in the United States claiming the ability to perform amazing feats. He could bend keys made of solid metal, twist forks at a distance of 50 feet, restart stopped watches. These stunts are, of course, the stock in trade of every dinner theater magician, and other professional magicians rapidly saw through them. How could Geller bend seemingly unbendable keys? Asked the stage magician James the Amazing Randi. He didn't. They were bent already. He just reveals the bend by sleight of hand movements that make you think it's bending. When Johnny Carson, a one-time stage magician himself, invited Geller onto The Tonight Show in 1973, Carson asked Randi to safeguard the props, with the result that every one of Geller's tricks failed. What made Geller something more than just another lounge act was his skillful reading of the temperature of his times. Stage magicians normally eschew mumbo-jumbo. Following the great Harry Houdini, who made a vocation out of exposing the table-rapping frauds of spiritualists, they cheerfully confessed that they had achieved their effects by sleight of hand. Geller, by contrast, claimed that his tricks were achieved by mysterious psychic powers. Powers conferred on him, he later said, by extraterrestrials. What Geller had glommed onto was the rising respectability of curiosity about the paranormal. It is unlikely that many more Americans believed in ghosts in 1975 than in, say, 1935. What changed over those 40 years was the composition of the audience for the eerie. In Richard Condon's 1960 novel, The Manchurian Candidate, one character tells a newspaper reporter, Always ask for their astrology sign because people love to read about astrology if they don't have to ask for it directly. The implication being that asking for it directly was somehow embarrassing. Faith in horoscopes or in any other uncanny phenomenon contravened the tenets both of Orthodox Christianity and of modern science, the two dominant faiths of mid-century America. Have you peered into the future in 1960, you would have guessed that the star of astrology was fated to sink even lower as the spread of higher education led more Americans out of superstition into enlightenment. Only 1 in 10 of those Americans born in 1905 had any post-high school education. After all, while 1 in 3 of those born in 1955 did. Instead, tales of spirits and prophecy from the stars moved from the cabins of the Ozarks and the palm readers' booths at county fairs into college dormitory rooms and suburban kitchens. The University of Rhode Island instituted an occult studies program. The CIA quietly funneled money to researchers in psychokinetics and telepathy. The retired chairman of Stanford University's Material Sciences Department set himself up as a psychic healer. Time Life Books instituted a new series on the occult. Stephen King published his first novel, Carrie, in 1974. Spooky movies, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, The Exorcist, topped the box office charts. The actress Jane Seymour made her film debut in the 1973 James Bond movie Live and Let Die as a tarot-reading fortune teller. In the spring of 1978, 4 of the 5 New York Times fiction bestsellers took the eerie and bizarre as their topics. J.R.R. Tolkien's posthumous The Silmarillion, the Amityville Horror, Carlos Castaneda's Ring of Power, and Gnomes by the Dutch writer Will Huygen and the illustrator Ron Portfleet. Between 1976 and 1982, the number of working astrologers in San Francisco jumped from 23 to 33. In 1976, the city had to make do with only 5 occult supply shops. By 1982, it boasted 10. In the 33 years before 1968, 11 books were published about the Bermuda Triangle. In the 7 years between 1968 and 1975, publishers cranked out 27. Newly tenured professors of women's studies at Smith College and the University of California at Santa Cruz gathered in fields at midnight to celebrate reconstructed pastiches of the witches' Sabbaths of Baroque Europe. Gallup reported that 32 million Americans admitted to a belief in astrology in 1976, and Simon & Schuster published books by astrologers warning that their charts predicted climactic disaster. The Internal Revenue Service recognized acupuncture as a deductible medical expense in January 1973. Ida Rolfe taught the affluent of Manhattan and California that their neuroses originated in their vertebrae. Arthur Janov promised them that they could relieve depression and anxiety by lying on the floor and screaming. And L. Ron Hubbard charged them thousands of dollars to speak into tin cans and release the 65-million-year-old Thetan spirits lurking within their bodies. It was not the poor, the ignorant, who learned from Peter Tompkins' The Secret Life of Plants to coo to their hibiscus bushes, or who paid to have their biorhythms charted, or who employed personal psychics. One person who profited spectacularly from the recrudescence of magical thinking was a Swiss hotelier named Erich von Däniken. Von Däniken believed, or at any rate wrote, that the Earth had been visited by extraterrestrials before the dawn of history. These spacemen had, he theorized, brought the first civilization to ancient Earth. The record of their visit was preserved in the scriptures of the world's religions, and artifacts inspired by these spacemen could still be found. The story of Eve, he said, was an account of a cloning. The myth of the Golem preserved memories of the astronauts' robots, and the Bhagavad Gita preserved the memory of ancient atomic wars. Von Däniken published his first book, Chariots of the Gods, in Switzerland in 1968. And in the United States, in the United States in 1970, his sequel, Gods from Outer Space, was published in the United States in 1971. Paperback editions of the 2 books sold more than 6.5 million copies in the United States by 1974, and many more in Britain and Europe. A profitable movie was made as well. Von Däniken's methodology was not exactly scrupulous. Von Däniken claimed that the great trident carved by pre-Columbian Indians in Pisco Bay, Peru, cannot be seen from the sea, when in fact it can. That it pointed toward the Nazca lines of the Bolivian highlands, when in fact it does not. That it was carved into solid rock that Indian tools could not have cut, when in fact it was carved into layered salt that those tools could cut. Yet, for all the glaring inaccuracy, von Daniken's science fiction fantasy satisfied the needs of an age that hungered for mysteries. In its content, the God is a spaceman theory may have been scientific flim-flam. For its adherents, it came to be a substitute faith. Back in a minute. Thank you. In both science and religion rest in the end upon things external to oneself. The physical universe, in the case of science, the commands of God, in the case of religion. Magic looks inward. If you can only learn the right jumble of phrases, sky charts, or spells, then you will be the master. In a society that was rapidly losing confidence in institutions, magic was appealing because it assured individuals that they could control their destiny unaided. As one of the basic psychic healing texts put it, ultimately, you get exactly what you want. If you or a friend of yours has some illness, one of the things you're going to want to do in the course of your psychic healing is to find out what it is the person is getting out of that condition. Another thing you're going to want to know is whether he is willing to let go of the illness. This is an individualism run amok, an individualism that not only refuses to be bound by the laws of society, but even the laws of nature. No crank of the 1970s expressed a more extreme version of that individualism than Werner Erhard, creator of what may be the paradigmatic self-improvement movement of the decade, EST, or Erhard Seminar Training. Erhard, who began his career as Jack Rosenberg, a used car salesman from Philadelphia, ditched his wife and 3 children in 1960 and ran off to California. After dabbling in various human potential movements, he unveiled his own in 1971. Training would take place over 2 consecutive weekends. Trainees would be locked up in a room for 15 hours a day, forbidden to use the washroom, and then yelled at by trainers. Erhard contended that individuals could control absolutely every aspect of their existence. He would shout at trainees, "You are an asshole," by which he meant someone who denied that he controlled his own life. And then when they agreed to take responsibility for whatever ill had prompted them to seek out EST, he would announce, "You are omnipotent. You are God in your universe." He would say, "You caused it. You pretended not to cause it so that you could play in it. And you can remember you caused it any time you want to." New York Magazine reported in 1978 the case of a man who had stopped wearing eyeglasses because he decided to take responsibility for his bad eyesight. Less comically, the American Journal of Psychiatry reported in March 1977 a series of psychotic episodes suffered by people who had attended EST seminars, including that of a man who had become convinced that he could survive without air and immersed himself in his swimming pool to demonstrate it. 750,000 people enrolled in one Erhard program or another between 1971 and 1988, including Hollywood figures Valerie Harper, Cher, John Denver, Cloris Leachman, Raul Julia, and Peter Guber. At their peak, Erhard's enterprises were grossing as much as $30 million a year. Then, Erhard was hit by accusations of sexual molestation from one of his daughters, a colossal IRS tax lien, and a tough story by 60 Minutes. He fled the country in 1991. The tax case was eventually settled, but Erhard's empire never recovered. And yet, our language shows the lingering impact of EST. Every time someone says, "I take responsibility for that," or when we assure a friend who has got into trouble that we support him, or ask to be left alone by saying that we need our space, we are chatting away in EST speak. The essence of EST speak is its clever packaging of moral evasion as moral responsibility. What, after all, does it mean to take responsibility, as Attorney General Janet Reno ostensibly did after the conflagration of the Branch Davidian compound in Waco, Texas, that left 86 people dead? She was not defending her action as right or proper under the circumstances, But neither was she apologizing or expressing remorse. Certainly she was not resigning. What was she saying? What she was saying evidently was that the action she took was taken by her. Beyond that, she had nothing to add. In a similar vein, we might wonder what it means when we tell an errant friend that we support him. That we condone what he has done? Probably not. That we will forgive him if he makes amends? Then we should emphasize not our support, but our expectations. That we will remain his friend no matter what he has done and whether he apologizes or not? But that's a contemptible thing to say, isn't it? And that is the end of the, let me see here. Keep forgetting what. The Golden Age of Cranks. And back in a minute. Thank you. So the difference between being a reactionary, an example of the difference between being a reactionary and a true conservative, and that comes with Mark Kaye, who is defending Joe Rogan. Here on Instagram, he writes, "Not one of these people demanded that Joe Rogan invite them on his podcast to debate the issue, nor not one of them asked for equal time. They all just yelled, 'Shut it down.' They can't debate. They have no solutions. They have no alternatives. They are devoid of ideas." Now, all very well and good. Again, more on the complaining side than anything else. But what he should have done was responded to them by saying, "That's okay. If you want to go ahead and take Joe Rogan off, we will simply reinstall Joe Rogan's podcast somewhere else, and we will install him in a place where he cannot be removed, he cannot be shut down, he cannot be silenced, and there's not a damn thing you can do about it." That's the true conservative response, and it is a true conservative response because it's a counterattack. We're going right back at them, and we're going back at them with the very weapons they try to use against us. Psychologism, bluffing. They love to bluff. Single payer in the state of California just failed. Again, I think it's the second or the third time that they've brought that up. But they're always bluffing. We're going to do this. They have these big grand schemes and plans. We're going to expand the Supreme Court. We're going to bring in single payer. We're going to do this and that. We're going to have bullet trains. And none of it ever gets done. In part because everything has to be perfect. But the other part of it is their technique is always to use psychology to try to bully and intimidate, not to use reasoning to convince people that what they're doing is right, but using psychological methods to bully and intimidate. And you got to go right back at them the same way. Because if you go the road that Mark Kaye went, the reactionary way, and say, well, in essence, that's not fair. They should have asked him, to come on a show and for asking for equal time or whatever. That's very high-minded. But the left, in case no one has noticed on the right, is not high-minded. Okay, so all that stuff just goes right over their head. And they're going to continue to use trigger words and all kinds of other psychological tools to control the conversation, because they know if they control the conversation, they control the world. So the true conservative knows and understands that and responds accordingly. Thank you. I was listening to Hugh Hewitt earlier this morning, and he was having his callers or his listeners call in, and one of his favorite things to do so that he doesn't actually have to spend a lot of time working or earning his money. So he has either he interviews somebody and they get to do most of the talking, or he'll have his listeners call in. And again, they can take up some of the airtime. The problem with this is that, it's his show. It doesn't belong to the listeners, and very often the listeners are unprofessional. They have bad voices. They have bad connections. It's just generally bad radio. But anyway, so he was having these people call in so that he could say or ask them the question about, ask them a particular question. So one caller calls in and gives him an answer to his question. He responds by saying that he said that, it was his response was about a guy that I used to listen to on the radio, and I can't remember his name right now, but he was on 97.1, and he used to do a show about men. It was very, but the whole idea was telling men, don't get married, don't bother to get married, you don't need to, and very male chauvinist pig kind of stuff. So let's put it that way. So anyways, Hugh Hewitt described him as being basically a disc jockey that moved over into talk radio, and really the only thing that the disc jockeys know how to do is fill airtime between commercials, and that they really produce nothing of any content of any merit. And then he went on to say about John and Ken, the John and Ken Show, whom I've on this podcast I promote at the end of my podcasts. Not so much lately, but I'll be getting back to that. Promoting the John and Ken Show. And he says about John and Ken, well, I don't think they've read a book between them. So I'm gathering he's not terribly impressed with John and Ken, but he doesn't understand. It doesn't matter whether they've read a book between them or not. The true conservative is a person that uses common sense. Okay? And you take the wisdom of your elders, you've listened to your parents, you've listened to your teachers, you've listened to other important authority figures in your life, and you use common sense, use the evidence of your senses and the use of your mind to figure things out. And more importantly, and perhaps most importantly, you use your conscience. And that's what John and Ken do. And that's why they speak unequivocally, and they speak definitively. They most of the time they're making statements that are in which there's anyways. Let's just say the overall tenor of the show is they're unapologetic. They present and they say this is what's right, this is what's wrong, this is what should be done, and they don't apologize for it, and they don't water it down. They're absolutely not zeros the way Hugh Hewitt is. Hugh Hewitt is always trying to make himself a more polished and smoother zero. But it was interesting that he would go ahead and pick John and Ken out of all the people he could criticize for that particular oddball kind of criticism. Thank you. So firing and whether or not people should call for the firing of various people, public and private. I was listening to Sean Hannity, and Sean Hannity very proudly proclaimed that on his show they don't call for the firing of anybody. And I think this is in reference to Joe Rogan, and that there's people who are trying to get him off the platform of Spotify. But anyways, so, and it's typical reactionary behavior. If the left is calling for firing and we stand in opposition to the left, then we must therefore make sure that we don't call for firing. And it's simply untrue. It lacks a subtlety and nuance, his analysis here. The issue is sincerity. You can call for the dismissal or firing of anybody without being immoral about it, as long as you are sincere. You sincerely believe that the individual deserves to be fired, and you can back it up if you're challenged, then absolutely. But if you're going to go ahead and call for firing as a psychological, using this phrase as a psychological weapon, calling for the firing as a psychological weapon, in which case you're being insincere, then what you're doing is immoral, and you should stop it immediately. As a matter of fact, you should apologize, make amends to the greatest extent possible, and learn from your mistake and change your ways. So again, The reactionary goes ahead and just blindly reacts to whatever it is the left is doing. The left does A, then I have to do Z, that kind of thing. Whereas the true conservative thinks the matter through and, most importantly, consults with his conscience. So you listen to what Sean's saying, and your conscience should be bothering you. You should be, something doesn't sound right about that, because that's where I started. When I heard Sean say this, I thought, I don't know, something doesn't sound quite right about that. On the surface it sounds good, but something else that bothers me about it. And through thinking it through, I figured out what it was, that there is, it's not just an either or proposition, that there's more to it than that. And again, the true conservative bothers to think things through so that they get it right the first time. Thank you. Feeling safe. That's an issue that I've wanted to get to for a long time. One of the con games that the left plays is in the issue of safety. They go and ask people. They don't make an independent assessment as to whether or not people are safe, reasonably safe, let's say. But they go out and determine safety by how people feel. So they go and ask people, do you feel safe? So that allows for a lot of manipulation, a lot of bullying, and a lot of intimidating. So what we should do here, and what the true conservative does, again, is resort to reality. We are realistic people, so we look at reality. And the reality is to analyze the situation to determine whether or not the person is reasonably safe. And the issue is also safe from what? If you're out on the freeway on foot, you're not safe from the traffic. If you're at home behind closed doors, you are safe from the traffic. So it depends on what it is that you're talking about in terms of being safe from what. But basically, there's an objective quality to that, a realistic quality. We know that if you're on the freeway, you're likely to get hit by a car, whereas if you're at home behind closed doors, you're not likely to get hit by a car. So if you're at home, you're safe. And so we need to be able to do that, because otherwise we have government programs that are safety oriented. A lot of regulatory behavior is based on safety, keeping people safe from various things, safe from crime, safe from gun violence, safe from pollution, etc. And we need to be able to list objective criteria for that safety so that we can know whether or not that particular project is working or not. So again, with regards to safety, it's not about whether you feel safe. It's not about what you feel anyways. Your feelings are always going to be transitory. I may not feel safe right at this moment, but maybe 10 minutes later, I do feel safe. So it's a ridiculous standard by which to measure things. We want to measure things when you're talking about safety, you want to measure things as objectively as possible. Thank you. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States today, and reminding you about John and Ken. The John and Ken show is on 2 to 6 p.m. Weekdays, Monday through Friday, 2 to 6 p.m. Pacific time, by the way, and they're also on all of their podcast of their show on all the usual, especially iHeartMedia, because that's their radio station is part of iHeartMedia. So again, check them out. They are they use their consciences and determine what is right, what is wrong, what it is that should or shouldn't happen, and they don't equivocate and they don't vacillate, and they know what they're talking about. They sound and act like a true conservative, and that's my point. So, but until next time, I want to remind everybody to be honest, to be smart, to be beautiful, and to remember that the left has no authority, no power, and they can't win.